The air was electric inside Madison Square Garden on September 7th, 2001. 30,000 souls pressed together in the darkness, their collective anticipation creating a low, constant hum that seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the iconic venue. It was the second night of Michael Jackson's 30th anniversary celebration concerts, an event that had brought together the biggest names in entertainment to honor 3 decades of musical innovation and cultural impact. The first night had already made headlines around the world, with performances that defied expectations and reunited the Jackson brothers on stage for the first time in years. Now, as the crowd waited for Michael's solo performance, the energy in the room had reached a fever pitch. Cell phones glowed like fireflies in the darkness. Security personnel lined the barriers, their faces masks of professional concentration. The stage stood empty, bathed in blue light, a temple awaiting its god. And then silence fell, a silence so complete, so profound, that it seemed to swallow every breath, every heartbeat in the massive arena. This was the moment of suspension, the sacred pause before transcendence. When the first beats of Billie Jean pulsed through the speakers, the crowd erupted into a roar that seemed to lift the ceiling. Spotlights swept across the stage as dancers took their positions. And then, rising from below the stage on a hydraulic platform, there he was. Michael Jackson. The sequins on his black jacket caught the light like stars. The single white glove on his right hand raised in that iconic pose that had become visual shorthand for musical genius across the globe. His presence was immediate and overwhelming, a force of nature contained in human form. As he began to move, the years seemed to fall away. This wasn't a 43-year-old veteran performer, 20 years past thriller. This was Michael in his prime, defying time, gravity, and every limitation of the human body. The first verse flowed into the chorus, his voice crystal clear and powerful. The audience sang along, 30,000 voices becoming one, a chorus of adoration that wrapped around Michael like an embrace. He acknowledged them with subtle nods, his movements never stopping, the choreography executed with military precision and artistic grace. This was what they had come for. This was the magic. Halfway through the song, as Michael glided across the stage in those impossible steps that seemed to bend the laws of physics, something unexpected happened at the far right edge of the stage. A commotion erupted near one of the security barriers. Guards turned, their bodies tensing. Through the flashing lights and swirling fog effects, it was difficult to see clearly, but those in the front rows would later describe a blur of movement, a figure breaking through the human wall of security personnel. A young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, had somehow managed to scale the 4-foot barrier, evade the guards, and was now sprinting across the stage toward Michael. Her face was wet with tears, her arms outstretched, her mouth open in a cry that was lost in the music and the crowd's roar. She wore a homemade T-shirt with Michael's face painted on it, surrounded by glitter and handwritten lyrics. She had clearly planned this moment, waited for it, dreamed of it, and now she was living it, running toward her idol with the reckless abandon of true obsession. The security team reacted instantly, 3 guards breaking formation and racing to intercept the fan before she could reach Michael. The audience gasped collectively, the uniform sound of 30,000 sudden inhalations creating a strange vacuum of sound even as the music continued to play. Those close enough to see Michael's face in that moment would later struggle to describe his expression. There was surprise there, certainly. Even after decades of performing, such breaches were rare and potentially dangerous. But there was something else too, a flash of recognition perhaps, not of the specific person, but of the emotion driving her, the desperate need to connect, to touch, to verify that the object of such profound adoration was real and not just an image on a screen or a voice through speakers. What happened next occurred so quickly that many in the audience would later question their own memories, comparing notes with friends and strangers in an attempt to construct an accurate account. As the security guards closed in on the young woman, now just 15 feet from Michael, he did something that no one expected. He raised his hand, the one without the glove, in a clear gesture of halt. The command in that simple movement was unmistakable, and the security team hesitated just long enough for Michael to make eye contact with the fan. She froze in place, trembling visibly even from a distance, her chest heaving with exertion and emotion. For 3 heartbeats, perhaps 4, Michael and the young woman stared at each other across the remaining space that separated them. The music continued, the dancers maintained their routine around them, but in that small pocket of the stage, time seemed suspended. Then Michael did something that would be recounted and debated in fan forums for years to come. He smiled, not the practiced, performance smile that he wore through most public appearances, but something smaller, more genuine, almost private despite the 30,000 witnesses. He beckoned to the young woman with 2 fingers, inviting her closer. The security guards looked at each other in confusion, their training at odds with this unexpected development. The audience, sensing something extraordinary unfolding, lowered their phones and cameras, collectively choosing to experience the moment rather than document it. The dancers, consummate professionals, continued their routine, subtly adjusting their formations to accommodate this unplanned interruption. The young woman took one hesitant step forward, then another, her hands now clasped in front of her, as if in prayer. As she came within arm's reach of Michael, she sank to her knees, overcome. Michael knelt down to her level, still moving slightly to the rhythm of the music that seemed now to exist in another dimension. He spoke to her, his words lost to the audience, but clearly significant to the young woman, whose body language transformed from desperate longing to grateful reverence. She nodded rapidly, tears flowing freely down her face. Michael reached out and took her hand, an extraordinary gesture from a man known for his germophobia and careful maintenance of physical boundaries. The touch seemed to electrify the fan. Those in the front rows would later swear they could actually see the shock of it travel through her body. If this story moves you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more untold stories about Michael Jackson's extraordinary life and the countless moments of genuine human connection that defined his career beyond the headlines and controversies. The security team had recovered from their initial surprise and now moved in again, this time with more purpose than urgency. Michael nodded to them, indicating that the situation was under control. He helped the young woman to her feet and, in a gesture that drew audible gasps from the crowd, removed the rhinestone armband he was wearing, a piece of the iconic costume that had been carefully designed for this specific performance, and placed it in her hands, closing her fingers around it. The symbolism was lost on no one. A piece of himself, freely given, a recognition of the emotional investment this fan and others like her had made in his life and work. As security gently but firmly escorted the young woman off the stage, she clutched the armband to her chest, her face transformed by joy. The entire interaction had lasted less than a minute, but its impact rippled through Madison Square Garden like a stone dropped in still water. Michael, ever the professional, seamlessly reintegrated into the performance, finding his place in the choreography without missing a beat. But something had shifted in the atmosphere of the concert. The barrier between performer and audience, always somewhat permeable at Michael's shows, but still definitively present, had momentarily dissolved. That brief connection, human to human rather than icon to admirer, had transformed the remainder of the performance into something more intimate, more authentic despite the massive scale of the venue and production. As Billie Jean drew to a close and transitioned into the next song, the applause was different, less frenzied, more reverential. The audience had witnessed not just world-class entertainment, but a moment of genuine grace. Hours later, as the final notes of the concert faded and the house lights gradually illuminated 30,000 emotionally exhausted fans, the story of the stage invasion and Michael's unexpected response was already spreading through the crowd, across the phone lines, into the early internet forums where fans gathered to share experiences. "Did you see that?" strangers asked one another as they filed out of Madison Square Garden. "Have you ever seen him do anything like that before?" Security personnel, gathered for their post-event briefing, were equally perplexed. The standard protocol for stage invaders was immediate removal, no exceptions, especially for a high-profile performer like Michael Jackson. His security detail was legendary for its thoroughness and efficiency. That he had countermanded their response was unprecedented. The young woman, whose name was Elena Marquez, a 22-year-old student from New Jersey, was not arrested or charged. At Michael's personal request, conveyed through his tour manager to venue security, she was simply escorted from the building after a brief questioning to ensure she posed no threat. She emerged from Madison Square Garden into the New York night, clutching the rhinestone armband, and wearing an expression that one security guard would later describe as like someone who'd seen the face of God. Reporters, always present at Michael's events, quickly surrounded her, thrusting microphones at her tear-streaked face, demanding to know what Michael had said to her on stage. He said he understood. Elena told them, her voice barely above a whisper. He said he felt the same way about his fans that we feel about him, that it was all about love. She held up the armband, the rhinestones catching the streetlights. He said to keep this to remember that connection, that no matter what separates us, stages, security, fame, we're all just humans trying to connect. The quote would appear in newspapers around the world the next day, accompanied by blurry photos captured by audience members of the moment Michael knelt beside the fan. The images were imperfect, slightly out of focus, oddly framed, but they captured something essential about the encounter, something raw and genuine that professional concert photography rarely achieved. Inside his dressing room, Michael sat quietly as his team bustled around him, removing makeup, collecting costume pieces, debriefing on the performance. When his longtime manager asked about the incident with the fan, Michael was uncharacteristically forthcoming. "I saw myself in her," he said simply. "That hunger, that need. I know what it's like to want something so badly you'd risk everything for just a moment of it." He looked down at his hands, one still bearing the iconic white glove, the other now missing the armband. Sometimes we need to remember that the barriers we create for our protection can also become walls that separate us from the very connections that give our lives meaning. The manager, who had worked with Michael through the stratospheric heights of Thriller and the challenging years that followed, recognized a rare moment of unguarded reflection. He nodded and moved on, understanding that some thoughts were too personal to probe further. What no one knew then, what no one could have known, was that the rhinestone armband Michael gave to Elena Marquez that night would take on a significance far beyond a simple souvenir of a concert encounter. Elena, deeply moved by Michael's compassion and the unexpected gift, would go on to found one of the most significant Michael Jackson fan charity initiatives in the world. The armband, which she never sold despite offers reaching into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, became the symbol of the foundation. Connecting Through Kindness began as a small fan club effort to honor Michael's humanitarian work, but grew into an international organization that built schools in developing nations, funded children's hospitals, and provided arts education to underprivileged communities, all causes that Michael had championed throughout his career. Each year on the anniversary of that night at Madison Square Garden, Elena would display the armband at charity events, allowing fans to see it up close, to connect with a tangible piece of that extraordinary moment when the King of Pop had recognized the humanity behind the adoration. The rhinestones lost none of their sparkle over the years, preserved carefully in a custom-made glass case when not being displayed. "This isn't just a piece of memorabilia," Elena would explain to new volunteers at the foundation. "It's a reminder that behind every celebrity, every icon, there's a person who understands what it means to yearn for connection. And behind every fan, every expression of admiration, there's a human heart seeking recognition." The impact of that brief encounter extended far beyond Elena and the foundation she created. Bootleg recordings of the Madison Square Garden concert became some of the most sought-after items among collectors, not for the performances themselves, which were later released officially, but for that unscripted moment of connection. Fans who had been present that night spoke of it as a transformative experience, one that changed how they viewed their relationship with Michael's music and public persona. It humanized him, one audience member told a documentary filmmaker years later. Not in the way the tabloids tried to do by exposing weaknesses or flaws, but in a way that elevated both him and that fan. It was like watching someone remember who they really were beneath all the layers of fame and expectation. For the security team, the incident became a case study in crisis management and the unpredictable nature of live performances. The head of security, a veteran with decades of experience protecting high-profile clients, would later incorporate the story into training sessions for new team members. Sometimes the performers see something we don't, he would tell them. Our job is protection, but their job is connection. The art is knowing when to step back and let that connection happen safely. The guard who had been closest to Elena as she rushed the stage, who had been prepared to tackle her before Michael's gesture stopped him, left the security profession the following year. He never publicly stated that the incident was the reason for his career change, but friends noted that he seemed profoundly affected by what he had witnessed. He would go on to work with at-risk youth in his community, teaching them about respect, boundaries, and the power of genuine human connection. The dancers who had been on stage that night, maintaining their professionalism throughout the unexpected interruption, developed a special bond through the shared experience. In later interviews, several would cite it as the most memorable moment of their careers, not because of the potential danger or the break in routine, but because of what it revealed about the man they were supporting on stage. We all knew Michael was kind, one dancer recalled. We saw his generosity every day behind the scenes. But watching him in that moment, responding with such instinctive compassion rather than fear or anger, showed a depth of humanity that still moves me when I think about it. He could have had that girl removed immediately. No one would have questioned it. Instead, he chose connection over protection, vulnerability over power. That's rare in anyone, but especially in someone who had every reason to be cautious about such encounters. The audience members who witnessed the incident firsthand carried the memory with them, a touchstone of authentic human connection in an increasingly digital and disconnected world. Many would describe it as the most powerful live performance moment they had ever experienced, not for the technical perfection of the dancing or the vocal prowess on display, but for the raw emotion of watching two humans transcend the usual boundaries of celebrity and fandom to meet as equals, if only for a moment. I've been to hundreds of concerts, one attendee wrote in an online forum dedicated to memorable music moments. I've seen legendary performers in their prime, but I've never seen anything like what happened with Michael and that fan. It wasn't about the music in that moment. It was about recognition, seeing and being seen as a real person, not just a performer or an adoring face in the crowd. As the years passed and the story was told and retold, it inevitably evolved, details shifting, emphasis changing depending on who was doing the telling. Some versions focused on the security breach itself, painting it as a dangerous lapse that could have ended tragically. Others romanticized the encounter, embellishing Michael's words to Elena, transforming a brief interaction into an extended heart-to-heart. But those who had been there, who had witnessed the raw simplicity of the moment, would always bring the narrative back to its essence. A barrier breached, a hand extended, a gift freely given. A moment of genuine human connection in the midst of the carefully choreographed spectacle that was a Michael Jackson concert. For Michael himself, the incident at Madison Square Garden became a private touchstone, a reminder of what his music and performance had always been about at their core: connection. In the increasingly isolated years that followed, as legal troubles and health issues forced him further into seclusion, he would occasionally mention that night to his closest confidants. That girl who rushed the stage in New York, he would say, she wasn't trying to hurt me. She was trying to reach me. Sometimes I think we're all just trying to reach each other across whatever divides us. These reflections, shared in rare moments of candor, revealed a man still grappling with the paradox of his existence. The need to be seen and known, authentically at war with the necessity of maintaining boundaries in a life lived under constant scrutiny. Elena Marquez kept her promise to honor the gift she had been given that night. The connecting through kindness foundation grew from a passionate idea into a respected international charity, eventually partnering with major humanitarian organizations while maintaining its roots in the fan community. Elena herself transformed from an impulsive young fan willing to risk arrest for a moment with her idol into a poised, articulate advocate for Michael's humanitarian legacy. When asked, as she often was, about the night that changed her life, she would smile and touch the small replica of the rhinestone armband she always wore as a pendant. "People expect me to say that meeting Michael was the most important part," she would explain. "And it was life-changing, of course. But what really transformed me was what came after, realizing that I could channel that love I felt for him into something that helped others." That's what he was trying to tell us all along through his music and his charity work. That love is an action, not just a feeling. On the 10th anniversary of that night at Madison Square Garden, Elena organized a special fundraising event for the foundation. Hundreds of fans gathered in New York, many of them wearing replicas of the rhinestone armband that had become the organization's symbol. The original armband was displayed in the center of the room, spotlit like the precious artifact it had become. As Elena addressed the crowd, thanking them for their support over the years, an unexpected guest slipped quietly into the back of the room. One of Michael's former dancers, now a choreographer in his own right, had come to pay his respects. When Elena spotted him and invited him to the stage, he embraced her with tears in his eyes. "Michael would be so proud of what you've created," he told her, his voice carrying through the microphone to the hushed audience. This is exactly what he meant when he sang about making a change and starting with the person in the mirror. You took a moment that could have been just a personal memory and transformed it into a movement that's helped thousands. As the event concluded and the guests dispersed into the New York night, many of them made their way to Madison Square Garden, standing outside the iconic venue in a spontaneous vigil of remembrance. They shared stories of how Michael's music had touched their lives, how his humanitarian work had inspired their own, and how the foundation born from that unexpected moment of connection had created a community that transcended the usual boundaries of fan culture. Passers-by, initially confused by the gathering, found themselves drawn into conversations about legacy, kindness, and the enduring power of genuine human connection. In this way, the ripples from that single moment continued to spread outward, touching lives far removed from the original encounter. If you've been moved by this story of an unexpected connection and its far-reaching impact, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support allows us to continue bringing you these intimate glimpses into the life and legacy of Michael Jackson, revealing the human being behind the legendary performances and the quiet moments of compassion that defined him as much as his musical brilliance. Today, the rhinestone armband that Michael Jackson gave to a passionate fan who stormed the stage at Madison Square Garden rests in a museum dedicated to music history and cultural impact. It sits in a simple glass case, the lights adjusted to capture the perfect sparkle of the stones without damaging the now fragile fabric. Next to it, a small plaque tells the story in brief, clinical terms: the date, the venue, the basic facts of what transpired. But it's the visitors who complete the story, who stand before the display with tears in their eyes, remembering or imagining that moment when 30,000 people fell silent, watching a barrier between performer and admirer dissolve through one simple act of human recognition. They press their hands against the glass, much as Elena Marquez once reached across a divide to connect with the music that had shaped her life. And in that gesture, the circle closes, past and present, icon and admirer, performer and audience connected through a single, shining thread of genuine human compassion.